Welcome everyone to our fifth and final session of the Integrity Agenda briefing series. Thank you for taking the time to be here with us today to discuss and learn more about our central question today. Is ESG a myth or a reality? And we're going to unpack this further and explore how organizations can embed the ESG agenda into their business and the role that you as ethics, legal and compliance functions can play to strengthen reporting and the transparency given the increased stakeholder scrutiny in this area. My name is Dr. Katharina Wegman. I'm the Global ESG Forensics Leader, and I'm truly honored to spend this hour with you moderating this timely discussion. As Victor Hugo once said, nothing is more powerful than an idea whose time has come. In the next hour, we will unpack this rich topic of ESG, and you will see there are many fun things to get through today. We will touch upon macro and regulatory trends, we'll go through challenges of ESG reporting, and we'll hear about leading practices and get a better understanding of what risks and opportunities the future holds. Also, you'll be able to ask questions throughout the session. So please look out, and I strongly encourage you to also make a benefit of this, because we can in the end also answer some of these questions. So please make sure to ask plenty of questions, and we'll make sure to get to them in the end. I'm especially excited to be joined by an all-star lineup of panelists who will introduce themselves in a second. And I've had the pleasure to have multiple conversations with each of them individually, and I can personally attest how passionate and trailblazing each of them are in this topic. Fun fact, two of them are literally in the middle of the night getting up for this panel. So I think this only shows how dedicated they are in contributing to this discussion. And one of them, full disclosure, has COVID, as many of us have. So my wishes go to especially you, Zain. Anahita, Klaus, Zain, welcome to the virtual stage. And thank you so very much for being here with us today. And I think we should get started in this really packed hour of learning and thinking and imagining things together. Anahita, Klaus, Zain, why don't you introduce yourselves, share some of your touch points with ESG, and maybe also give an opening statement, because to be honest, I'm quite curious what you personally think. Is ESG a myth or a reality?
Thank you very much, Katharina. It's a pleasure to be with you and such a panel today. My name is Anahita Thoms. I'm a partner with Baker McKenzie. I head up our international trade practice in Germany, and I'm specialized in sustainability in the supply chain. My touch points with ESG issues have been extensive, ranging from advising clients, obviously, but also to drawing attention towards this important development with politicians and supporting nonprofits and victims of modern slavery. So the reality of ESG is definitely different for each one of us. Some industries face its backlash. Others, I would say, ride its wave. However, no matter what industry or sector companies are active in, I think it is definitely so that they are all affected. Therefore, to answer your question, ESG is not a myth. It is more than just a short-lived phenomenon. It is a reality that our clients face, that businesses face, and some countries are able to even increase their competitiveness. We have seen examples of what happens when sustainability is not on top of a company's agenda. And on top of that, we will be speaking about that in a couple of minutes. Regulators have taken steps towards binding legislation and in enforcing ESG standards. So definitely not a myth.
Wonderful. How about you, Klaus? What do you want to get started us with?
Yeah, thank you, Katharina, and dear colleagues at the panel. Looking forward to a great dialogue. So about myself, very quickly, I joined Novartis about 3.5 years ago after 18 years at Siemens, where I was the Chief Compliance Officer. At Novartis, I'm a member of the Executive Committee and the Chief Ethics, Risk and Compliance Officer. And talking about reality, it's a timely day because we have later today at the company our Trust and Reputation Committee. This is our ESG Management Alignment Committee on the highest level, chaired by our CEO. and we are discussing really reality topics. One of the topics, for example, we'll discuss this afternoon is about the audit standards for ESG data. And you see how much we are moving towards reality, because as a data-driven industry in the pharmaceutical industry and as a company, data for ESG of huge importance. We will discuss the topic of risk of greenwashing, and Anahita mentioned the regulatory scrutiny about this. So what level of assurance do we want to inspire for going forward for ESG topics? It's maybe one issue for this discussion, definitely not a myth, very much a reality. And maybe closing here and handing over to Zane, for companies, also a challenge, because it's getting regulated, but at the moment, as a company, we have to navigate a kind of, jungle of standards, different rating agencies. Everyone has their own views how to measure and report about ESG. And I can tell you, even for a big company as ours, it's a challenge to find the right way there on reporting in an honest and good way. Handing over to you, Zane.
Well, thank you very much, Klaus, and thank you to all of you for spending your time with us over the next hour. I'm Zane, and I'm our country managing partner for our EY forensics practice in Canada. My role also includes being our ESG leader for the Americas, a role that I'm very proud to take on. To Katarina's question of ESG, is it a myth or a reality? Well, certainly, I don't think it's a myth. I don't think any of us can deny that at this stage. From an environmental perspective, we only have to look at the heat wave that is pouring through India and Pakistan right now, the hottest temperature in over 122 years. From a social justice perspective, we've seen, through the COVID years, the last couple of years, the issues with anti-Asian hate and the pressures that have been put on working mothers in a COVID environment. And to Klaus and Anahita's points on greenwashing, I know even through my own practice and speaking with general counsels, one of the biggest concerns that they have is matching up the aspirational statements that are made by a lot of senior executives to say, these are all the things that we're going to do, match up all those aspirational statements with reality and things that can actually be substantiated. So perhaps we can, take the next hour and especially encourage you to send in your questions, because really at the end of the day, this is your time. We're here to answer your questions. We're here to share with you as much as we possibly can. So don't be shy.
I'm so glad to hear that there's such an alignment, because I think that's also a sort of alignment, unprecedented alignment, if I may say, that we can also see across stakeholders. And Anahita, you already touched upon also the regulatory scrutiny and the developments we can see most recently. If you would be so kind, would be wonderful if maybe from a legal perspective, you could tee us up a little bit about the most recent trends that you can see with regards to the regulatory scrutiny.
Thank you, Katarina. So where to start, I have to say, because the legal developments that we have been seeing are immense, really. So I think to start with soft law is, I think, the right way to start this, because we are really seeing a shift from soft law to hard law, a shift then from reporting requirements to due diligence requirements. So this is, I think, the bigger picture analysis that I would give to you. So what has happened in some jurisdictions is, and I can really speak for Germany here, that policymakers started to think about national action plans based on the UN guiding principles. However, they realized quite soon that although there were these UN guiding principles on business and human rights, as well as the EU's OECD guidelines for multinational enterprises, the action plans for business and human rights nationally, they were not advancing human rights, for example, in practice. So what they decided after many discussions with companies and actually, I would even say big fights among them, to decide to bring in laws. And for example, in Germany, we have the Act on Corporate Due Diligence in Supply Chains, but also in France, we have, for example, a law focusing on vigilance obligations. For a very long time in the UK, we have the UK Modern Slavery Act. In California, we have such a law too. And on EU level, I would say we see the biggest movements, although EU member states are not really aligning there completely. But I think the European Commission President has a big ambition. We have on an EU level now a proposal by the EU Commission on the Directive on Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence. I expect that to be passed. There were lots of debates and discussions around that, but in some shape or form, we are going to see this law. What is, I think, very important for this audience as well, because sustainable finance is a key issue nowadays, is what are you going to report? What do you have to collect data-wise? So what we're seeing there have been non-financial reporting requirements for a rather long time, but this is going to be, there will be more scrutiny around that. And we mentioned greenwashing a couple of times. There is a proposal by the EU Commission there again for corporate sustainability reporting directive, which shall amend the non-financial reporting directive. I think you have to make sure that you comply with that, because that is something that will be out there for people to read. And it's not only important for your reputation, obviously, but also with regard to investors who will read that. I will not go into the EU Green Deal, and Zain can speak much better on the SEC developments. And I'm sure that Klaus has some points to add, but I would say big shifts we are seeing on the regulatory landscape here.
Excellent point, Anahita. Thank you for giving us this context. I think this is incredibly helpful for everyone to just set up the discussion. I'd be really curious to understand, Klaus, from your perspective, how does that resonate with what Anahita just shared with us? And also, is there anything missing from your side, especially given also the pharma context, which of course is a highly regulated market? Any observations from your end?
Yeah, you're reading my mind, Katharina, and I trust you have a lot of compliance professionals in the audience. So, I mean, we all know that already compliance with existing regulations is a huge challenge. Working in a totally regulated environment as the pharma industry, I can fully support this. Now, the ESG challenge is now more complex if you listen to Anahita. Because we have this shift from soft law to hard law, and we have some regulations already in place, which go beyond classical compliance. And then we have the expectation of society, which is still not regulated, but will be regulated maybe in 3 to 5 years. I give one classical example is maybe the regulation of artificial intelligence, which is more in the S pillar of ESG, I would say. We see the first draft standards, and we're all working with artificial intelligence. And we know that the regulators, the prosecutors will start looking at potential missteps maybe in 3 to 5 years in hindsight. And so we have the challenge to comply already now with an increasing number, as Anahita said, of regulations, but to build trust with society, what we all want to do as part of society. Compliance is unfortunately or fortunately not enough, because we have to predict basically how is the reputation shaped, what is the expectation of society, and try to be on time to to have already answers in place in corporations. And I think this is the unique challenge. It's not enough to be in compliance. You have to have a look in the future and prepare the companies already now without having a clear regulation in place.
I love what you just said, Klaus, almost like this pivot towards corporate citizenship. What does that mean in the context of business? I think this is such a tremendously important topic. So thank you for sharing that perspective. I'd love to turn over to you, Zain. If there is there anything missing from your perspective, also that you have this Americas lens that you can offer for us? But then also, given that ESG reporting obviously is one of the fundamental first steps on anybody's ESG journey or sustainability journey, I'd also be curious to hear from you. What do you think are some of the struggles that you hear our clients have, and would be really curious to hear about that.
Well, thank you, Katarina. Firstly, to answer your first question, there's definitely nothing missing. Both Anahita and Klaus have provided a fantastic, very helpful context, but maybe to get into the struggle of what the challenges are. And Anahita talked about it actually very eloquently when she talked about the various regulatory regimes and frameworks. You know, everybody wants to do the right thing. And I think when you look back at what Anahita provided us, it was a number of regulatory frameworks that are out there. Everyone wants to do the right thing. There are just many differing views on how that comes together. You know, Klaus talks about disruptive businesses, which are absolutely fantastic. The use of artificial intelligence and how, you know, how we could wrap our hands around that. The big challenge really is, you know, what I'll describe as perhaps some of the old school challenges that we've run into in the past. When we're looking at ESG data that's used for reporting, sadly, a lot of what we're looking at is unstructured data, things that aren't really in an accounting package or financial reporting package in a traditional environment. And where does that data reside? You know, unfortunately, a lot of it is still what I would describe as side of the desk data, things that are kept in spreadsheets and in siloed parts of the business that aren't really integrated and speaking with each other. And the big challenge there is really, how do you get that information out of those varied siloed systems that don't necessarily even speak to each other? But how do you determine how robust that data really is? How is it reliable? Because at the end of the day, you know, we're going to be making disclosures the same way that we would disclosures around financial statements. Financial statement disclosures are a little bit easier to wrap your head around because they rely on accounting guiding principles, generally accepted accounting principles that all reconcile. Well, ESG data doesn't, you know, there's no methodology to get it to reconcile just yet. So many of the participants on this call here, individuals in positions of chief legal officers, chief compliance officers, are actually taking on a lot of responsibility there to say, okay, these are the statements that we're making. These are the statements that we're relying on. How do we know that they're actually accurate? How do we know that they're robust? I think that's the biggest challenge that I can certainly see all of us contending with right now.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And also it goes back to what Klaus said earlier about assurance. What level of assurance are we comfortable with? And I think that's also, Zain, a question that we within a Big Four, of course, are reconciling and really trying to move forward with, and trailblazing the way in which we can move forward with this topic. I'd wonder if Anahita or Klaus, if you have any additional struggles or challenges that you could see in your day-to-day job, just so that we can make sure that we cover everything from that angle.
To add to something that Zain said, I think what I very often see when we support clients on their reporting is that the company structures are not always designed for collaboration and interaction between the departments on this particular issue. And it will be a challenge to implement coherent ESG planning, forecasting, budgeting, etc., if you don't have the structures in place. And so all these issues of not having structures and processes and collaboration will basically result in either insufficient or not really persuasive ESG reporting.
Yeah, I would fully agree. You hit the point, Anahita. And look, I mean, it's the challenge is on various levels. I would say it's very pragmatic on the way where is the data and how clean is the data. At the end, everyone wants to come to an integrated reporting on ESG, right? And I can tell you from my own experience, when we did the first integrated ESG report for Novartis this year, this was a huge challenge because you have the data in silos. And this is not an easy remediation from today to tomorrow. So what is a fix in companies and what is needed is a good organization behind this, right? Because to have the ideal IT system for ESG is maybe a topic if you invest in this in a couple of years. But so the question the companies have to ask themselves, what kind of organization you put in place to at least get the data together in a reliable way. And that companies have different answers to this. And maybe also interesting to hear your view, Katharina, as when in your practice, how you see companies reacting to this. So we for example, said we have a horizontal approach. So we say the ESG approach, a trust reputation committee, that's basically the management team of Novartis, but we need an ESG office, which is bringing all the efforts together. So we don't silo ESG in one department, but we have a catalyst, a driver who brings it in to the integrated reporting. That's of course efforts of resources, and some companies are hesitant to invest in this. But I believe there's no other way, because if the data is not on a fingertip there, you need manual efforts to get the data out. You need resources. Maybe Katharina also would be interested to love your views, how you see how companies are reacting there.
Yeah, it's an excellent point. I mean, as you know, I'm obsessed with the G in ESG, so the whole governance topic. And that's really something I also struggle with. Like, how do we bring different disciplines together? I think the huge challenge really is in ESG that by its very essence, it's inherently interdisciplinary. It needs different lenses, it needs different competencies. And I don't know how you all feel about this, but I almost think that's one of the biggest challenges for us as human beings within organizations in any case. Like, how do we break down silos and how do we bring competencies from different disciplines together? I feel like some of it is also part of the diversity, equity, and inclusion discussion. How do we bring really different lenses and perspectives and experiences together to then be successful on the ESG journey? But I don't know how all of you think about this, because I feel this human component on us being better in like getting interdisciplinary teams together without necessarily saying my discipline is better or more, I don't know, is better and more supreme than your discipline, but every discipline in ESG and sustainability has a true value. So I don't know how you all think about this, but that would be my 2 cents to that.
Zain, should I go first and then
go for it, Anahita.
So it resonates so much with me, Katharina. I think that if you look at the ratings of companies and whether they're fair or not fair, and I absolutely agree with Klaus, it's an uphill battle, day-to-day job, but also strategic foresight, etc. I think if you look at ESG and how broad it is and who you have to bring on this journey, it just already shows it is a team effort, and it's definitely not a one-man or one-woman show. You have to bring HR, supply chain, communications, finance, investor relations, governmental affairs. I mean, I could go on and on. I think what is very clear is the tone has to come from the top, and we have to and Klaus and I have discussed this a couple of times already, we have to make sure that we have strong leaders. And some studies already show that the ratings go up when you have strong leaders. There are still not, I mean, many of the companies, I would say 1/3 have board level attention. Some have the chief sustainability officer right underneath the board, but still too many companies don't have dedicated and broad sustainability officers with broad skill sets. So I think choosing your sustainability leaders wisely, but also be a little bit more courageous about it. Just go ahead and try things out, because what we're seeing on the NGO side is that they will look for how is the structure, how is the governance. They become even, I mean, they are smart anyway, but they have become very smart about looking into the governance of the companies and see where is the chief sustainability. Is he just some kind of person who has been dealing with a minor issue before, and now he does 25% of his job is the chief sustainability officer. And to pick up on something that Klaus said, I think what is also very helpful is to bring in outside perspective. So I've been seeing a development on what companies call their sustainability boards. And to your point on diversity, equity, inclusion, you don't need you don't need that board to repeat what you already know and what you already think in your bubble. What you need are new perspectives, new ideas. So I find it an interesting dynamic to observe and support these boards on their journey. And I stopped there because I could go on and on, but please, Zane and Klaus.
You're in good company, don't worry. We can all go on and on about this. Zane, what do you think?
We could go on, but yes, certainly. Just to reiterate a couple of excellent points that have already been made by Anahita and Klaus on strong leadership, because understanding stakeholder management, understanding leadership, and understanding structure is very, very important here. Because at the end of the day, ESG and this sort of ethical choice of doing the right thing when no one is watching it's also has an impact on the bottom line, because certainly a lot of ESG choices, reinventing businesses or making ethical choices can be rather capital intensive as well, right? So we're talking about real dollars here as well. So if you think about ESG and, the sustainability officer and the influence of the ESG department, are they really, what is described as perhaps a more passive role in the organization, or do they actually have an ability to set structure, strategy, make a difference, that they can't just be shoved to the side to say, this is what we're doing and that's that. Instead to say, well, no, this is the decision that we've made. This is our responsibility as an organization, and these are how we're going to live our values. It's all about integrity, ethics, and values at the core of it. And so sometimes that can get expensive, but the better organizations out there, the ones that are actually taking a step back to say, yes, this is going to impact our bottom line. Yes, this is going to impact our margin, but our stakeholders, who include our customers and our employees and all those individuals out there, are actually understanding this. And yes, perhaps we'll take a short-term reduction in margin, and quarterly profits won't be what they'll be, but we'll have all these other KPIs and metrics to demonstrate all the other value-based things that we're doing.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%, Zane. And what I hear from all of you, Anahita, Klaus, Zane, is also the whole notion around it's rather to build everything in as opposed to bolt on top, which goes also into this direction, Zane, what you said. If in the short term, this might hit your bottom line, but in the long run, it is going to pay off. And that's also what a lot of the academic research is indicating, that it's very much short-term versus long-term view, right? Which maybe is a super nice transition to also thinking a bit of leading practices. And I can also see already some questions coming in, and please keep them coming in, because they're really powerful, and I'll cover them in a second, because it fits quite nicely also to leading practices. But maybe let's pivot to what can be done in order to really turn the needle in ESG reporting, but also to really build in and embed sustainability as part of who you are as a corporate citizen. And if you're okay with that, Klaus, I would love you for starting us off with that, because Novartis namingly having been on this ethics journey for quite a time now. So maybe you can kick us off with some of the leading practices that you are observing.
Yeah, let me pick on this leading, because that's an opportunity and a danger in itself. So, I mean, many things have been mentioned. I mean, it's like for compliance. If there is no engagement by the top leaders, it's no way. It's all clear. But what is often overlooked is you need an ESG strategy. So what do you really want to achieve? And I see one danger in many companies, and maybe we went into this trap at the beginning of our journey ourselves, that you want to be leading everywhere on all ESG domains. This can't be. So it's maybe a provocative discussion now, but it has to start with a strategy. What is the purpose of the company? Where is your biggest impact as a member of society to the broader society? So if I take our industry, the pharmaceutical industry, it's definitely access to medicine, and get medicine fast to affordable prices to the broader population in a highly innovative way. That's the core, and that's very much into the S pillar. We will, of course, and have to fulfill the always growing expectation of society on the environment topic, dear to our heart. We all citizens, we all see with great concern where the world is going. But that's maybe, as a pharmaceutical company, not the biggest impact we can do. We will work a lot and be innovative, but the access to our patients, that's the purpose of the company at the end of the day. And my advice would be for all colleagues listening, ask yourself, do you have a clear ESG strategy for your company in place? All organizations have limited resources and budgets. Are you focusing the topics on really the top priorities on the ESG journey? And then maybe on closing, there's one thing which is often overlooked. Of course, there's a very close link between ESG and compliance, because you can forget your ESG rating if you have big compliance topics in the company, right? And I mean, this is a struggle we have, because even if it is a legacy topics, they hurt your ESG rating over years. I mean, we developed from the bad guys at the table 3 years ago now to be, in some of the indices, a leading company for ESG, but still the shadow is there from our past compliance issues, although they are resolved legally. And so this has to be also understood. I mean, even if you're a great environment, if you have bribery topics in the company, you can forget your ESG rating. So good advice, don't forget classical compliance, invest there, continue to invest, and make a clear strategy and priorities for the ESG impact and purpose of your company.
Yeah, excellent point. Thank you for that. And with that, maybe Anahita, do you want to share a couple of your examples that you can see in the market where you think, wow, that's really leading, or that's something our audience should get inspired by?
I think what I'm impressed by always is when it's a combination of compliance, but also that business ethics driving employee behavior and including the employees in their journey. So when we work on strategies, and of course I'm an attorney, but I often sit in these rooms when it's about strategy, and I think what is the most compelling cases is when companies advocate for business ethics and through that motivate their employees to perform their roles with integrity. And we see that the younger generation especially considers sustainability performance something given. They really expect the employees to do that, but they're also much more easily excitable if you reach out to them and say, what is your view? What do you think is important? And to Klaus' point, you cannot be everywhere. Although we see backlash sometimes also in the media when companies focus on specific SDGs, I think it is fair to say it's impossible to focus on all SDGs, and we should not be naive about it. Therefore, I believe you have to bring in your employees to drive change. So tone from the top, as we all repeatedly said, and then embed it in the DNA and bringing also perspectives from really young employees and where they think we are heading. Because when you look at the war for talents that all companies are facing, I think that can be actually a competitive advantage if you do that.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Anahita. I mean, it's almost like authentically like following your path as an organization, because I agree with you. Also you, Klaus, you can't really focus on everything. It's also not authentic in the end, let alone realistic. And ultimately, it's all about what you want to stand for. And then how can you prove that this is how you contribute to broader society? So I hear you. This is, I think it also takes a lot of courage, right? To go out there and say, I can't fulfill the 200 different KPIs from ESG, but as a matter of fact, I'll focus on 3. And here's how I operationalize them. I think it takes a lot of courage to stand out there in the wind and then have that conversation as to why you chose these 3. But I think that's exactly the type of journey organizations and leaders especially have to go on. I would love to hear from you, Zain. Any leading practices, impressive examples that you have seen? Would love to hear your view on anything you'd like to add here.
Sure. Just one point to add here is really around understanding ESG risks, right? Because to the point that you just made, Katarina, about chasing those 200 KPIs and chasing the 200 metrics, at the end of the day, you can't boil the ocean. You really just have to understand the risks that are most impactful to you as an organization, as an industry, and try and deal with those as the priority. I know for myself, I spend a lot of time working in the mining and metals sector. And obviously one of the biggest issues there is really around the social license to operate. Right? Because guess what? If you don't have a license to operate, then your mining rights aren't really worth too much very quickly. And to the point that Klaus raised earlier, you want to understand really the bigger picture issues, but you want to understand the underlying risks that are impacting you the most. And so sometimes that involves a rationalization process. That involves really listening to the key stakeholders in the organization and the key individuals that are going to make an impact. Sometimes it's actually doing something that's perhaps controversial, but actually ultimately very brave. I think of an example also in the pharmaceutical industry from a very, very long time ago. And I go back to 1982 with Johnson & Johnson and James Burke, and around this little known medication at the time called Tylenol that had been tampered with in Chicago very, very early on in when it was being put out into the market. And frankly, the CEO of Johnson & Johnson at the time, James Burke, made this decision to yank it off the shelves, pull it off of every single shelf and make a guarantee to their stakeholders, to the public, to say, in a month, you're going to get this medication back and you are going to be able to rely on what we're putting out there. And in a month, Tylenol turned around and it was on the shelves, and it had what was called the 3-stage tamper-proof protection. And frankly, that's something that we all take for granted now, right? Like we look at our medication and we go, yep, and some of us get very annoyed by it because you got to pull off all the stuff and, all the various seals and all those sorts of things. But the reality is that was something that was done very bravely and is actually an ESG component, right? And it's something that is ESG that is now part of our vernacular. It's part of how we consume products. So it just goes to show that making a brave decision around ESG, really understanding your ESG risks, can actually translate into how business is changed broadly. Maybe I'm just thinking of Tylenol because I'm taking a lot of it because of the COVID, but
I can't blame you. I mean, you're inherently biased right now, so it's totally fine. But don't worry, you have good social norms around you with us. We'll keep you accountable, not taking too much. We have an excellent question here from the audience already. I'm going to pick one of them. And again, I encourage all of you to really post your questions because we would love to cover some of them in the last 10 minutes of this panel. But one of them in particular, and Klaus, this is also relating to something you said earlier. You were talking about the ESG office that Novartis has implemented. And one question here from the audience was around what we would say is a typical size of an ESG department. And so I wonder if you could maybe share a little bit more details around the ESG office and how you have operationalized it. And also if you know anything about the size typically of an ESG department, whether that's a Novartis or what you've heard from some of your peers.
Yeah, and I think Zane said it nicely. It's also about the risk assessment, which should normally, if you follow good practice, determine then also the amount of resources you put in there. So, of course, that's the overall disclaimer. You have to look at the company setup, the purpose, the ESG ambition, the priorities, and then you come to an organization blueprint. So what we have done, I'm happy to give more insights because it should be a practical case study here for the audience. As we said, look, we have to bring it together, the tone from the top and the cross-functional role for ESG and a catalyst, a driver for this. Because if you do it separately, if you only have an ESG office on sustainability officer and no link to the rest of the business, that's a silo, an ivory tower. If you only say, oh, well, everyone is somehow dedicating 5% of her time or his time to ESG, it also will not work, right? Never work. So we tried, not perfect, to combine it. So to say from the top, there must be a CEO involvement. So the Trust and Reputation Committee is chaired by the CEO. And it's a subsegment of our executive committee, and we are defining the ESG strategy. Then we said we need to get involved the next level of senior leaders in the company. This is what we call the ESG Council. So from each business unit and function, there is one leader who has a kind of ESG head as well as the ESG Council to make it operationally. And then we have a fully dedicated ESG office. These are currently, if I'm not mistaken, 4 or 5 people full-time who just administer the whole topic, prepare everything, organize the reporting, build a bridge to our ESG finance team, because what we have learned is about data. We need to leverage data, and the finance team is normally quite good. Most of the best team in the company to get data right. And so we said, look, there's a special ESG finance task force to really get a holistic data set for the ESG KPI. So it's the ESG office in our company, around 4 or 5 full FTEs, so full equivalents, plus the management commitment on the council level and the CEO and executive commitment on the top level, and a dedicated task force in finance to drive the data assurance around ESG KPIs, if this is helpful.
Incredibly helpful. Yeah, this is a really good start. And then maybe I'd ask Anahita and Zain, anything you have seen with regards to sizes of ESG offices? I think that was already a really fascinating example, but then also what role technology plays, not just in investigations, but also on the broader journey, especially as you heard Klaus, also in the reporting context and assurance around the data. So those two questions, ESG office sizes you've seen and role of technology.
So happy to answer that one on ESG sizes or ESG office sizes. I think the short answer is it really depends, right? Because the reality is, Klaus has given us this great example of an organization that's taking things very seriously and really putting in the right amount of board level oversight, senior management oversight, and commitment there. Unfortunately, I would like to say everybody follows the same model, but unfortunately, it's not really the same. There have been a number of models that I've seen, some fairly, not destined for success, where they essentially just target a lawyer in the legal department and say, okay, you're now the chief ESG officer. You're responsible for ESG for the organization. And it's usually somebody who isn't the chief legal officer or general counsel. And they go, well, that's your responsibility. Deal with it. And I'm not really sure what they're supposed to do, because if you don't have, organizational buy-in, you're not going to get very far in that particular environment. To your question on technology, Katarina, yes, there is, the good news story. Good news story is that technology is advancing at an astronomical pace, and that's very helpful in the ESG environment. As I mentioned early on, a lot of ESG related data tends to be unstructured. It's really more words and numbers. And the ability to now analyze words is improving dramatically. The ability to harness that and aggregate it and make sense of words and sentiment is pretty good and is improving along the way. The ability to use open source data as well. And what I'll refer to as open source data is things like social media data or things that are out there that are reliable sources, because from an ESG perspective, it's really important to understand, if a company's committed to deforestation, it's actually pretty easy to see whether that's true or not, or are there huge swaths of land that have been cut down and trees that have been taken down where they shouldn't be. Or if they're committed to a particular type of deforestation, are there trees that are growing palm oil as opposed to native trees? Or if it's a company in the oil and gas industry, well, is oil being released into areas that it shouldn't be? And we've all heard all these horror stories about oil being released into the Amazon and all those sorts of things. And, the big question is it being done by the company? Is it being done by nefarious actors? All those sorts of things. Using open source data, you can actually, you can track that and see that. And data should be an advantage to the organization as opposed to a detriment. Anahita, perhaps some thoughts from you as well, please.
Thank you. To add to that, I think on technology, I would say making use, as Klaus alluded to, making use of your CFO team. I think that is something that is really key. I see them really as bridge builders and a collaborative efforts between the Chief Sustainability Officer and the CFO. There's a lot of data that they have. They just don't know it's so relevant to you and to the ESG office. The second point I would like to note is on supply chains. So the digitization of compliance mechanisms and to see what's out there to increase transparency with regards to environmental impacts, for example, is really key. So and there are many different ways of using technology. I expect many more tools in the future to help that. COVID-19 helped to realize we need to be more digital when it comes to our supply chains. We need to analyze it. We need to anticipate. And, we have cloud-based services, blockchain technology, digital twins generate transparency over the entire supply chains. I have to say, though, that all these tools are not used by all the clients that I advise. So I think there is a logistical challenge to bring the data together, but there is also a little bit of hesitance sometimes on using new tools, new ideas. And that is on the one hand to see and find transparency in your supply chains, but also to be more customer oriented, for the customer, for example, to understand where is my good, if it's a supplier of goods. I think there is lots to be done there, and I expect a lot of startups to focus on this area.
Yeah, that's an excellent transition. Also, I mean, the final questions or the final question I had for you guys was around future developments, because of course we can see developments in lightning speed. I mean, the DOJ and the SEC have announced their enforcement actions for the future in that space, but also, of course, the European regulatory developments. But I just wonder, what else are you seeing on the horizon that our audience should be incredibly mindful about and alert about? And I wonder, Klaus, if you want to kick us off, maybe. What do you think about that?
And I will try to be very brief to let the colleagues speak. So 2 points come to my mind. First of all, the concept of collective action, because as companies, we have to do our individual work and clean out our shop. But just as Anahita mentioned, supply chain, I mean, this is monstrous. That's huge. And so what we try at the moment, not perfect, but we are at least trying it, as the Pharmaceutical Supply Chain Initiative, which is now an association of more than 40 top pharmaceutical companies, try to have the same standards for our supply chain, try to come up with audit modules, which will, and hopefully in the future, there's a dream there to have a basis, of course, in line with the antitrust laws, a kind of basis of suppliers we all can use, because they're all under due diligence, have the same standards, and are bulletproof from an ESG point of view. So collective action, I think, is super important. The one thing we did with the Norges Investment Bank recently on anti-bribery ESG standards, which we published recently, also collective action of 10 pharmaceutical companies with one of the biggest investors globally to define ESG standards. And the second one, handing over to the colleagues, it's about people. I mean, we need talents. There will be an enormous demand on ESG professionals, and we need people who have this assurance lens, not being in silos as a subject matter expert. We need really have the broad view, and this will be a challenge in the company, in the departments, but also for the boards, to be honest, to have the right expertise in the boards and in the executive committees as well. Who wants to go next on this topic?
I think, Anahita, I mean, there was one of the favorite keywords, right? Diverse talents and what do people bring to the table here? What do you think about this?
He said it all, so there's nothing left. I think, yes, diverse boards is a key thing we will be seeing in the next couple of years. I mean, if you look at the German Corporate Governance Codex, which really reflects on this important issues, that you have to have your boards being able to see what so the advisory board needs to understand what the board is actually doing in the sustainability sphere. I think that is really key. I think we also will be seeing more and more companies looking at it from a competitive advantage perspective, rather than, oh, this will cost us money. There is this famous sentence always say, you think compliance is expensive, try non-compliance. I think ESG is the same thing. I also think that we will be seeing more lawsuits against companies, although the lawsuits may not be at all, normally the court would even refuse to take that action. However, the reputational risk and the harm through that, the NGO sues you already happens there. It's all over the news. I think what we also will be seeing the power of social media and how you don't even have to go to the regular press any longer to claim that someone has done greenwashing, pinkwashing, etc. I think, mastering your social media activities and making sure that your values are reflected. Ethics and integrity management, I think that is something that I'm seeing, and luckily also seeing more and more colleagues from other law firms suddenly being more interested in this is always a good sign. So I stop that and hand over to Zain.
Excellent. Zain, go ahead. 1 more minute before we then close it
Exactly. I'll be super quick, and I'll wear my America's hat for this one to just say, what do I expect to see? Regulatory action, right? Because the US Department of Justice last week announced their special office to focus in on environmental issues. We all know the US Department of Justice and the SEC picked certain issues. They did it very effectively with the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. I have every reason to believe that the ESG is going to be their next big initiative from an enforcement perspective. So, certainly that's my parting thought on that issue.
Definitely. I mean, that's something we cannot hammer home enough, right? That the pressure is going to be on. And I think that's quite a strong statement from that direction. Before I hand over to each of you again for one closing remark that you can maybe leave the audience with, I have to ask you for like a final, very spontaneous question to you guys. By a show of hand from 0 to 10, how confident are you that we will make this a reality as a collective group, all of us being in different areas in the world? Like from 0 to 10, how confident are you we can make this happen? Wow. Okay, Klaus, 6. Okay, we got to work on this.
Klaus, come on.
That's maybe my risk officer hat.
Yeah.
To bring some balance into the enthusiasm. But that's my closing word. I'm absolutely optimistic. It will not go away, but we will see a bumpy road. There will be disappointments. There will be unfair attacks towards companies. There will be justified attacks towards companies, and therefore I go to 6 because I believe it's overall positive, great, but it will be a bumpy road for all involved stakeholders.
Yeah, 100%. I gave you here the confetti because I 100% agree. Anahita, what about you? What's your closing statement? Something the audience can take away from this?
In German, I would say unverbesserliche Optimistin. So I continue to be very optimistic, and you have to see where we come from. When I still was an attorney in New York, people really didn't want to even speak about this topic. And in the last couple of years, we have come a long way. And I think consumers, investors, and employees will really drive this. Even if some companies are still reluctant. I think to close with, bring in a diverse group of people, bring in outside perspectives, bring in people like Klaus who can show that they have gone this way. It was bumpy and it's still challenging. I think communication, not working in silos, I would say that is key for the next couple of years.
Yeah, I love this. This resonates so much with me, Anahita. I mean, I've been in ethics now for 13 years, and I totally know what you mean, that all of a sudden, we don't need to talk about the business case anymore, but finally we can talk about how do we actually get it done, as opposed to proving for the 1000th time that this is working. So thank you for that sentiment, because I truly share it. And then Zain, last statement from your end before we close this wonderful panel with you guys.
Just very quickly, and to echo Anahita, unbridled optimism. This is, we're finally talking about something that we've needed to talk about for a long time, but we're talking about it very seriously. So I do think real change is coming.
So for me, there's nothing left to say really, except thank you, all of you, Anahita, Klaus, Zain. Really, I cannot thank you enough for being here with me today and with the audience, and being so honest about your journey and the insights that you have provided. I really hope everyone enjoyed this session. I certainly did. And with that, I wish you all a wonderful day, and really hope that I can see you wherever you are very soon again in person as well. And all the best to all of you. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you so much.